we're seeing a historic degradation in public trust in our third branch of government, in all the branches, but particularly in the third branch of government right now. What can we do in the profession to try to claw back some of this public trust in our institution?
Well, first, I think we need to be careful stewards of it. I think lawyers have been in part to blame for the collapse in the public trust because we've been too quick to tear down the legitimacy of courts when we don't like their decisions. And we really need to be careful about how we talk about these things. There are decisions that come out from the Supreme Court or from district courts almost every week that I don't agree with. And we have every right and an obligation to explain why we disagree with it. But we need to be mindful stewards and grateful for the system that we have and that we operate in. So I think we need to start as a first step, thinking about how we talk about the courts and not to undermine their legitimacy. But we also need to explain what they do. And I think a lot of Americans don't appreciate what courts do. Most people don't work in the court system every day. Most people only experience the courts when they're directly involved as a litigant, which even if they get a result that they'd prefer to not have been involved in litigation. So it's a painful experience. Or maybe people learn about the courts through sensational crimes or through a political decision that, a politically adjacent ruling that either they're excited about or upsets them. But all these things skew their understanding of the courts. So I think lawyers have an obligation to teach fellow citizens about how the law really works day to day and how we all rely on a court system, even if we're never in front of a court. The fact that a judge is there to be a neutral arbiter of a dispute, if it arises, undergirds all of our economy, all of our rights, and all of our liberties. I mean, we all depend on this. Everything that matters to an American citizen, from their physical security to their economic prosperity to the security of their rights and liberties, that all depends on the rule of law. And the rule of law ultimately depends on an independent, courageous, strong judiciary.
How is misinformation and the disinformation that we see really circulating online, particularly on social media, but also in traditional news sources as well? How is that fundamentally changing the landscape in which our judicial system is operating?
I think social media has been a problem. People are, and some of it is actively malicious. There are actors out there who are trying to stoke fear and division and drive narratives. Some of it is just normal Americans trying to understand what's happening in a system that seems opaque to them and getting it wrong. And I think that lawyers do come from a position of privilege that can be helpful, and that we need to engage in social media. And you'd be surprised. I mean, I think lawyers. I've been surprised as someone who engages in social media that sometimes just a very kind of banal, down the middle tweet explaining what a court actually did will become viral because there's a hunger for understanding. And I think there really is great power to truth, and the lawyers should feel an obligation to spread some truth and to shine some light and help people understand what the courts are doing, because courts do not do a good job of explaining for themselves, explaining themselves to the public, and we can help do that for them.
It can often feel abstract to everyday Americans, I think, asking them to care about things like the rule of law when they are also needing to be concerned about things like gas is $6 a gallon and I can't pay my rent. How can we convince everyday Americans that this is something worth caring about?
I think we have to explain to Americans how much rests on the rule of law. If you're concerned about affordability, wait till you have a system in which contracts aren't enforced, or when disputes in businesses, between businesses, or between a consumer and a company, do not have a neutral forum where they can go to resolve those disputes. You don't want to live in a system where you have to go before a judge who answers to the powerful, to the rich, to the government. You want to go before a judge that can vindicate your rights according to the law and according to the facts. And I think we all understand that. You don't want your kids to play a little league game if the ref is the father of the pitcher on the other team. Nobody wants that. And you don't want that as an American citizen either. We need an independent judiciary and a rule of law. And that really, it is a kitchen table issue. In countries that don't have the rule of law, don't have economic growth, they don't have stable prices,